Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Vardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Vardhari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Vardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Vardhari Yasodananda Brajajana Ranjana Yasodananda Brajajana Ranjana Yasodananda Brajajana Ranjana Yasodananda Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Oh Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaur Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaur Hari Bo Jai Om Vishwara Paramamsa Parivranta Srima Bhagavan Great Shri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantaraj Shrima Bhagavatam Ki Go Premanandi All glory to the assembled devotees All glory to the lotus feet of Shri Shri Guru and Gauram Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya 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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Srimad Bhagavatam. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, We first offer respectful obeisances to the personality of Godhead, Lord Narayan. Unto Narayan Rishi, supermost human being, Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, by rendering service to the pure devotees, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed to practically nil. And thus loving service unto the glorious Lord, who is praised with transcendental hymns, becomes established in the irrevocable. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 2, Verse 16. Okay. Please repeat. Mam Keriyati Etad Ajasya Janma Mam Keriyati Etad Ajasya Janma Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe Braje Cha Vaso Ri Maya Eva Swayam Braje Cha Vasuri Vayareva Swayam Purad Vyavatsit Yad Ananta Viryaha Purad Vyavatsit Yad Ananta Viryaha Mam Kledayati Etat Ajasya Janma Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe Vraje Chavasori Vayareva Swayam Purad Vyavasid Yadananta Viryaha Mam Kledayat Yetad Ajasya Janma Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe Braje Chavasori Vayareva Swayam Purad Vyavasid Yadananta Viryaha
Mam Kedyati Tad Ajasya Janma
Mama Kledayati Etad Ajasya Janma
Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe
Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe
Vraje Chavasori Vayadivasvyam
Raje Chavasori Vayadivasvyam
Pura Vyavasit Yadananta Viryaha
Purad Vyavasit Yadananta Viryaha Mam Kledayat Yetad Ajasya Janma Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe Praje Chavasori Vayadivasvyam Purad Vyavasit Yadananta Viryaha Mam Kledayati Etad Ajasya Janma Vidambanam Yad Vasudeva Gehe Praje Prajecha Vasori Vayade Swayam Viradya Siddha Anantavirya. Okay, anyone else? Do the word for word. Mam, to me. Kiryati, gives me distress. Etat, this. Ajasha, of the unborn. Janma, birth. Bidambanam, bewildering. Yat, that. Vasudeva, Gehe, and the home of Vasudeva. Braje, and Vrindavan. Cha, also. Vasaha, and habitation. Adi, enemy. Bayat, because of fear. Eva, is if. Swayam, himself. Purat, from Mathura Puri. Vyavasit, fled. Yat, one who is. Anantavirya, unlimitedly powerful. Translation, please repeat. When I think of Lord Krishna, how he was born in the prison house of Vasudeva, although he is unborn, how he went away from his father's protection to Braja and lived there incognito out of fear of the enemy. And how, although unlimitedly powerful, he fled from Mathura in fear. All these bewildering incidences give me distress. Okay, this is Uddhava speaking, Krishna's dear friend, confidential minister, servant. I guess we'll just jump right into Srila Prabhupada's purport. Because Lord Sri Krishna is the original person from whom everything and everyone has emanated, Ham Sarvasya Prabhaha, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 8. Janma Yasya Yataha, Vedanta Sutra, Canto 1, chapter 1, verse 2. Nothing can be equal to or greater than him. The Lord is supremely perfect. And whenever he enacts his transcendental pastimes, is a son, is a rival, is an object of enmity, he plays the part so perfectly that even pure devotees like Uddhava are bewildered. For example, Uddhava knew perfectly well that Lord Sri Krishna is eternally existent and can neither die nor disappear for good. Yet, he lamented for Lord Krishna. All these events are perfect arrangements to give perfection to his supreme glories. It is for enjoyment's sake. When a father plays with his little son, the father lies down on the floor, as if defeated by the son. As if defeated by the son. It is just to give the little son pleasure and nothing more. So this is what really gives Krishna pleasure. It's a lot more ecstatic for God, pleasurable for the Lord and his devotees. When the Lord can play or work as an equal, that's very difficult to understand in the mind of many religions, especially in the Mideast and Western nations, because our theology is very much confined to awe and veneration. And you find that in Hinduism also. There's a lot of awe and veneration for God, whether in the form of Vishnu or Shiva or the Trinity in general, as they call it, or even the Brahman or the all-pervading spirit. There's this great feeling of awe and veneration. And people have a very hard time, many times, they have a hard time understanding Krishna's pastimes or God's pastimes. They kind of chalk it up to mythology, or they do things like try to say that actually it was three different persons in Krishna's Leela or pastime. There was a Krishna in Vrindavan and a Krishna in Mathura and a Krishna in Dwarka. So they try to figure this out according to our human brain. It's very difficult for them to accept a supreme being who can come and enjoy pastimes with a father and a mother and friends and relatives, and who can fight some really bad enemy and ultimately achieve victory in a sort of heroic, dramatic way. Very difficult for people to accept that God goes through this labor or play. For them, God would just appear and hold out his hand and cast, all of his adversaries into the pit of fire somewhere, and he would award virtuous opulence to his followers, those who would bow their heads before him. That's, our Western view of God, and very much the view in Islam. They never see a person; they always see some force that's incomprehensible, and to the extent that it becomes the words on the tip of my tongue, but I can't get it out. It's one becomes a heretic to even think of God in terms of a person. But the fact of the matter is that we are like God. We want to have some pleasure in life. We don't want to go through life, morose and depressed and, just suffering, miserable mentality, or, physical pains, disease. None of us want that. So, how can we expect that God wants to live a life full of disease and pains and, having to succumb to old age and invalidity and ultimately death? Certainly, those things aren't very amusing to the person who's supposed to be in charge, the person who's supposed to be controlling everything, the Ishwar, the God. No, so it isn't, so Krishna, like the father, perfect analogy here, just like the father who will play with the kids, and he'll be beat up by the kid, he'll fall to the ground, and the kid thinks that he achieved some victory and it's all fun, and then father may get up and he may even ride on the father's back, and they'll do all kinds of things for the pleasure their children, grandchildren, children in general, you know. But it's play. It's play for the children to have fun. So Krishna, he has fun. He'll let Prahlad go through all sorts of danger, all sorts of atrocities by his very own father, the epitome of, you know, the domestic abuse. Most abusive father anyone in creation could ever have, past, present, or future. You know, he just tried to torture him to death again and again and again. But God saved him again and again and again. You know, and then finally God made his dramatic appearance at the right time, you know, as everyone would expect in the picture show. You know, and slays the demon. So, you know, this gave Prahlad pleasure, it gave Krishna pleasure, it gave all the good people pleasure. It scared the demons, those who were on the abusive father's side, who supported him. So, you know, this is Krishna. Otherwise, how can we comprehend how he can play like a little boy and, you know, have pleasure doing things that babies do for their parents? You know, Bala Krishna, as we're getting ready to sing about in the next week or so. You know, who can imagine that Krishna would have fun and running from his mama, chastising him for breaking pots, turning over milk, stuff like that. And then, you know, being apprehended and punished. You know, how can God take pleasure in it? But it's because those persons who have earned that privilege to be his mother, to be his friends, to be his relatives, are performing without this conception that I'm dealing with God. I have to be on my toes. If I do something wrong, you know, it could be the end of my pleasure. It won't give me pleasure, but it could put an end to whatever pleasure I have if I offend God. I'll be, you know, a blasphemer. They just cut off some guy's head in France, a teacher, because he showed some cartoon of Muhammad. So, you know, no one wants to be labeled a blasphemer in a religious society. A heretic. They may burn you at the cross, you know, after a witch hunt, as was commonly done, even in our country. You know, all sorts of things happen to people that become labeled. You know, get judgment passed on them by the mob. So, but these devotees are so pure that Krishna can appear amongst them, and they don't. He's not going to be mistreated. You know, they're not going to get envious because he's the best-looking guy. They're not going to get envious because he always manages to defeat the opposing forces. They're not going to get envious if his side loses, because Krishna takes pleasure in his devotees beating him sometimes. You know, so these devotees have earned this privilege to join Krishna's Leela. And they can play with him without thinking he's God. They can parent him without thinking he's God. They can serve him without thinking he's God. And Krishna will take great pleasure in that. He'll take pleasure in turning to Uddhava, his minister, and saying, you know, we got this dilemma here. You know, this guy, this king, you know, he's captured all these people, and they're asking me to help them, to get them out of this prison. He's going to sacrifice them to get some sort of, you know, material rewards from the goddess Kali. And they're asking me for help. But at the same time, the Pandavas, my most dear relatives and friends, are asking me for help. What am I to do? How can I, you know, achieve both things? So Uddhava helps him to figure it out. You know, look, we can do this. because that's Uddhava's job, that's his dharma. He's a political minister. He's a diplomat. He knows how to work between people and countries and nations and get the best result for everyone. So, they take pleasure in doing these things. But Uddhava, he's a very great devotee. And he can do these things even while Yogamaya, Krishna's potency to keep the devotees into the illusion that he's not God. Even if Yogamaya removes that curtain for Uddhava can still, balance these things, even though here we see he's admitting to being somewhat bewildered. And I'll finish this purport in a moment. Prabhupada will explain that somewhat more. So, unfortunately, all the people in lust, greed, and anger, they're under the potency of Krishna's material Maya, trying to enjoy independently of Krishna. So, if we don't have pure love for Krishna, then we have to have lust to try to satisfy our senses independently from Krishna. Or greed. If we're not under Yoga Maya, where we appreciate that everything belongs to God, and we try to utilize it like it's God's property, and we're always offering it back to him, then we have to have greed for accumulating big bank accounts and investments, and to being able to give charity here and charity there, and being able to manipulate my wealth and my followers, my family, etc. So that's Mahamaya, that's the material illusion, trying to enjoy independently of Krishna. When we're in the Yoga Maya, then everything is for Krishna. So Uddhava, he can have the veil of Yoga Maya somewhat removed. Mother Yasoda, sometimes it was removed. Like when she looked in Krishna's mouth. She was challenging her son. All the boys were accusing him of eating clay. So naturally the parent doesn't want their child to be eating clay. So the boys were accusing him. And Krishna was saying, I didn't do it. So his mama said, open your mouth, let me see. And when he opens his mouth, she sees the universal form. She sees all the planets in creation, all the people in creation, all the rivers and ever bodies of water and mountains and trees, and all the different forms of life throughout creation, including devas and powerful asuras and all sorts of gandharvas and different beings. Everything she sees at once. So the veil of Yoga Maya is lifted. This is not just an ordinary child of yours. This child is none other than the supreme being from whom everything has come. But then her natural love for that child becomes mitigated. No longer does her breast milk flow, because you're not going to think about giving breast milk to the Lord of creation, Deva Deva, the God of gods. So Krishna has to again put that Yoga Maya there. And she thinks, oh, it's just my baby Krishna. What's going on, silly man? And, immediately just looking at him, that's a baby. I mean, you have to be a mother to kind of understand. Oh, my baby. When they're that little, not when they're grown up and they're done wore you out, sucking breast milk for 4 or 5 years or more or less. But, right at the beginning, or maybe when you're a little bit used to it, you just, the baby really wants milk and you get to feed the baby, There's this bond of love. That child is dependent on the mother's milk. So, baby Krishna, wants that milk. And Mother Yasoda is so, not just enthralled and happy, but, so loving to give it. That's the epitome of her feeling of love. So, who can understand? That's what Uddhava is saying. Who can understand this? Why is Krishna afraid of these enemies in Mathura? This guy Kamsa, he's just a fig. God can knock him off like we knock a fly or mosquito away by doing like that. Just like Nrsimhadev killed Hiranyakashipu. This Kamsa guy's nothing. But Krishna's running from him like he's the Russian mafia or something, you know, and the guy's putting out a hit on his family or something. You know, Krishna's taking off. You know, his father's, you know, hiding him away somewhere else. He has to grow up there. He can't go back. Because otherwise, you know, the guy's going to finish everyone. So, you know, this is kind of putting Uddhava in distress. Why is Krishna having to do this? For Krishna, it's the ultimate pleasure. We may not be able to understand how Devaki and Vasudeva can take pleasure in this, but not until Krishna comes and frees them. You know, separation makes the heart fana. Just like, you know, when a lady's husband goes away to war, and she doesn't know if he's going to come back. And he comes back. Maybe she had a child during that time. I mean, there's no greater pleasure when he comes back healthy and fit. You know, and able to help, you know, raise the children and maintain the house. You know, and you know, and be her soulmate. You know, so when Krishna went back and finally slew the demon in front of everyone and personally released his father and mother from prison, then the height of pleasure is beyond anything we can imagine in our material state. You know, we can give some gross comparisons. So it's all for the pleasure of the devotees. And also for the chastisement of the wicked. You know, they become liberated when Krishna chastises them. They get free from their sins. They don't have to suffer eternally in some pit of fire. You know, Krishna is auspicious to everyone, including the demons. You know, when Krishna chastises them, they get purified. You know, they get a much better birth if they have to take one. They get to enter into the all-pervading Jyoti, the light of creation. You know, and experience Brahmananda, spiritual bliss. You know, so, you know, wherever Krishna is, there's only auspiciousness. There's never anything inauspicious. So let me finish up this purport because we only have about 5 minutes here. Listen how Prabhupada sort of changes. I had to elaborate there the way I wanted to elaborate those points because Prabhupada's going to change it a little bit. All these events are perfect arrangements to give perfection to his supreme glories. It is for enjoyment's sake that Prabhupada talks about the example of the father and son. Because the Lord is all-powerful, it is possible for him to adjust opposites, such as birth and no birth, power and defeat, fear and fearlessness. A pure devotee knows very well how it is possible for the Lord to adjust opposite things. But he laments, not like I was describing. Listen how Prabhupada presents this. He laments for the non-devotees who, not knowing the supreme glories of the Lord, think of him as imaginary, simply because there are so many apparently contradictory statements in the scriptures. Factually, there is nothing contradictory. Everything is possible when we understand the Lord is the Lord and not is one of us. With all of our imperfections. And Krishna's, never subjected to our imperfections. As perfect as we try to be, we can never be perfect. It's impossible. Krishna can only be perfect. We can be as perfect as Krishna wants us to be in a certain time, place, and circumstances. But what if Krishna wants us to be imperfect? What if Krishna wants us to deal with our conditioning? And we may think, oh, you mean I have some conditioning? Well then, why are we here if we don't have some conditioning? Are we Prahlad Maharaj? Or, Sukadeva Goswami? We all have some conditioning in this world or we wouldn't be here. So Krishna made, he wants us to exchange that, for him. We can't have both. We can't grasp Krishna and love Krishna unconditionally, if we still have to have please forgive me if anybody smokes, but if we have to have a pack of cigarettes in our pocket. What to speak if we have to go to McDonald's? Not for the new vegetarian burger, but so it's very hard to get Krishna's full reciprocation, if we maintain our conditions. So Krishna may want us to give up those conditions, my anger, my lust, my ambition to control, to be in charge, to be the Ishwara, because we all have these things within us. Krishna's an Ishwara, we are an Ishwara. Krishna is a very big Ishwara, he's the biggest. And we're very tiny Ishwaras. So, many times exerting our ability to control, we just clash. It's like Prabhupada would give the example of throwing rocks in the water, and you're throwing them all over the place, and they're all just clashing. You have to throw them all exactly in the middle to put out ripples where they don't clash. So Prabhupada would give the example that, Krishna's in the middle. We have to want to please just Krishna. Not that we're all trying to manipulate Krishna's property the way we think it should be manipulated. So very difficult in this material world, That's why the word surrender is used, because we're always forced to surrender. Our false ego. The ego where we're in charge. The I and the mine. Well, I am, and this is mine. Whereas in reality, I am Nitya Swarup Krishna Das. Dasa Dasanu Das. I'm the servant of the servants of Krishna. And this is what is taught in our Vedic culture from the very beginning in the Brahmachari ashram. At 5 years old, one leaves their parents in the days of yore and gets to go to an ashram where everyone's equal, whether they be Indra, the Yodin, the Pandavas, or some little bitty rishis, munis, brahmanas. Everyone is equal, everyone has to go to bed on time, everyone has to go out and beg for some food for the ashram, etc. Everyone has to listen, just like Krishna had to even listen to the wife of the spiritual master. She's the one who sent them to get firewood when all of that catastrophe happened in that particular pastime. So, the ashram isn't only for learning a dharma, it's for learning a character, but not just any old character, a transcendental character, where one can ultimately be detached from all these material things. That's what separated the great devotees in Krishna's Leela and Mahabharata, such as the Yadus and some of the powerful Kurava warriors, such as the Pandavas and Bhishma. Because they didn't only have knowledge, material knowledge, they had spiritual knowledge as well. And therefore they could remain detached and, play a particular role to please Krishna. Otherwise, how could Bhishma play that role? Everything was always going wrong down the line for him. I mean, certainly there were years where things were going great, but then ultimately so many problems being caused, problem after problem, and he's the one who has to continually support the throne, and everybody's depending on him ultimately to support it and to support them. And there's all this conflict in the family. So, Bhishma could ultimately be detached from it all, even having to fight on the wrong side of the families, He could remain detached because of his spiritual knowledge. We have to stop now because I went over time and the devotees had to really get ready to take off, otherwise the breakfast disappears real quickly. So, Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki,